Hello, Santa. Hello, Mrs. Claus. Hello to the elves and everyone at the North Pole and in the Claus community. My name is Ariana DeAngelis, and I am the training manager for the Autism Project. We are so grateful to all of you for being here with us today, joining us on this recording titled Understanding Autism for the Claus Community. Through this recording and through the live trainings that we've had as well, the Autism Project is looking to support all of you as you create these neuro-inclusive environments for the holiday season. Again, thank you so much. It is with such gratitude that we are here today, and truly we're honored to be a part of this. So one thing I will say, I have a master's degree in developmental psych. I have a master's in special education. I was a teacher for about 10 years before coming to the Autism Project. I've been here for 4, and I am still learning and learning every single day. So when we talk about understanding autism, each one of us watching this recording, each one of us at the Autism Project is a lifelong learner. We're learning every day. So yes, I'll be passing on some information to all of you, but I'm also learning right along with you. So thank you for that opportunity. In terms of who we are here at the Autism Project, we are, as I said, located in Rhode Island, in Johnston, Rhode Island, and there are a couple of components that are applicable to all of you. The first is, of course, our training department. We also have a large family support team. Our family support team consists entirely of parents of children on the spectrum. So if you're working with families, you may be a family member yourself, you may be an autistic person yourself, and you are looking to speak with someone about available resources and information or parent trainings or caregiver trainings or self-advocate trainings, please reach out to our family support team. We also have social groups for people ages 5 and up, summer camp for people ages 5 and up, and adult programming as well for adults of any age. So please check us out. Again, that website is theautismproject.org. A couple quick notes about my language choice for today's presentation. You're going to hear me switching back and forth between person first and identity first language. So I will be using phrases like person with autism and phrases like autistic person. Now, there's a lot of discussion about this within the autism community, which is why I'm taking that moment to explain and describe it. So I graduated with my master's in 2014. At that time, as I was moving into the classroom environment, I was told, as a professional in this field, you only ever use person first language. Phrases like person with autism, child with autism. The reason being, and the sort of thinking or reasoning behind it was, all of us are people first. Our diagnoses or lack thereof don't define who we are. So for the longest time, for over a decade, I only used person first language. And then I came to the Autism Project and started working very closely with folks in the community, working with them, working alongside them. Many adults are now choosing to use identity first language, using phrases like autistic person, autistic child. Now, for those folks, and I'm paraphrasing here, they will say things like, autism is such a huge part of who I am. Without my autism, I would be a completely different person. My identity is so closely intertwined with being autistic. I identify as an autistic person. So, which one is correct? There's no consensus in the autism community. I work with a group of people at the Autism Project, both again as a colleague and as a support in various contexts. And even within that small group of folks, there's not a consensus. And so because of that, I've chosen to use either type of language, but to do so with the utmost respect. Now, if you're encountering a person on the spectrum, one thing that you can do is, if it's developmentally appropriate, ask that person how they identify, and then use the language that they prefer. It sends a really powerful message that you're educated on the topic and a demonstration of understanding, acceptance, belonging. So just a quick tip for all you members of the North Pole. You also won't hear me using phrases like high functioning and low functioning today. I guarantee most of you have heard these phrases before. I definitely used to use them. So I started out when I was teaching. I started out in school specifically for students on the spectrum, working with boys 16 to 22 years old. And then I moved overseas and taught internationally for a few years, and then back here to public school. And I truly held my students on a pedestal. And yet, when I described them to other people, I described them as low functioning. My students are very low functioning, never imagining that that term was in any way disrespectful. I wasn't intending to be, but to identify someone as a low functioning person, when you think about it, it is disrespectful. The other piece of it is that what I unintentionally was doing was encouraging everybody around my student, by identifying them as low functioning, to set the bar really low, not to assume competence. You hear phrases like, oh, they're very low functioning. They can't do that on their own. You have to do that for them. So instead, we want to make sure that we see each person as an individual, that we focus on people's strengths. Now, a lot of people are on board when I talk about the low functioning part. And then I say, okay, so why don't I say high functioning then? Seems like a compliment to some people. But what that does is people often sort of use that term to excuse themselves from providing accommodations, from providing support. You're using your autism as an excuse. You're not trying hard enough. You got to just toughen up. You're high functioning. You don't need help. So rather than using terms like high functioning and low functioning, if I have to make a distinction, I will use autism levels, and we'll talk about that in a few slides. But again, a recommendation for you folks, and you might be working with families who use this terminology. You might be working with autistic people who identify using this terminology. But just as a rule, the community is moving away from this type of language. So I think I've gone over most of my sort of introductory components, except for one. You're going to hear a lot of stories about my students, people I've supported, worked alongside, family members, friends today. And just because you never know who you know, I'm changing everyone's names, unless they've given me permission to share their real name. So in order to just keep myself on track, usually I switch back and forth between the names Joe, Mary, and Taylor. So if you hear a lot of Joe stories today, it's not all the same person. I'm just trying to protect everyone's personal health information. Today's training is going to cover a few different things, and starting with the diagnosis of autism. What does that mean? There are so many misconceptions about autism in our community, and so many stereotypes about autism as well. So we're going to look at the diagnosis of autism, the neurodevelopmental characteristics of autism, how those characteristics may manifest as certain behaviors that you might see at the North Pole when your kids are visiting you, and some different supports we can use for both the child, or you may have some young adults visiting you as well, and the family. So let's dive in and start with what is my favorite slide. And I know you're probably surprised looking at the screen that I'm telling you this is my favorite, because it looks like the dry definition of autism from the American Psychological Association. But I don't care that you know this definition, nor that you even read this definition. I'm certainly not going to read it to you, because the only word I want to draw your attention to on this slide is that word in bold: neurodevelopmental. Autism is neurodevelopmental. It is not a behavior disorder. Why do we care? Why is that important? I'm sure if you didn't see me the first time, you're probably wondering, yeah, I don't know why. Why do we care about how the diagnosis is categorized? Just tell us how to support our kids. But it actually is meaningful. And I'll tell you a little story to kind of demonstrate this. So sometimes I work as a consultant in addition to being a trainer, And I was working as a consultant in a kindergarten classroom here in New England, and I was called in for unsafe behavior, is how it was classified. And unsafe behavior means something different to everyone, so I really didn't know what to expect. So I went into this kindergarten classroom. First of all, this child, wonderful child, tallest kindergartner I've ever seen. I'm 5'6", and he was about to the middle of my bicep. Santa, you'll appreciate that. You've met all the children of the world, so you know that a 5-year-old who's that tall, who's about head and shoulders above his other classmates. And yet he was smushed under this little kindergarten desk. So his legs were pressed up against the top of the desk. He was underneath this little tiny table. And because it was just after the COVID lockdown, he was in a homemade cloth mask that was very thick. And the children weren't able to get up and share toys and play together because of the restrictions. So he was sitting at this desk, either playing games on a smartboard with his class or learning lessons on a smartboard, or sitting at a laptop and playing phonics games. So at this point, I'm watching him from the back of the room. It's been about an hour and 15 minutes. And I'm thinking, how is he sitting for this long? I'm quite shocked by that. And I'm checking my watch. I'm looking at him. I'm looking back at my watch. And for any 5-year-old, that's pretty extraordinary. And almost as if on cue, I start to see some signs of dysregulation. They start out pretty small. He's tapping his pencil on the side of his desk, and then he flaps his hands a bit. And then pretty abruptly, he pushes this chair out from under his desk. He grips the sides of it, so he's holding the base of the chair. He looks up at the ceiling and he begins to kick the ground really, really hard. He's making a ton of noise, and the kids around him, as kids do, have a huge reaction. Joe, be quiet. I can't hear my computer. What are you doing? Da, 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 da. They're turning around to look at what he's doing. They're yelling at him. The teacher comes running over. The teacher's assistant comes running over. They're trying to quiet him down. He doesn't appear to be tuned into any of it. He's just gripping the chair, looking up, and kicking the ground over and over again. Now, while he's not tuned into this commotion, there is someone who is. There's a child at the other side of the room who has the diagnosed behavior disorder. And I knew that because when I first arrived in the classroom, I thought I was there for him. So they disclosed the diagnosis. And so I'm watching that child watch my student. He's watching and he's watching, and you see the wheels turning as he's thinking, not a bad idea. Think I'll try that. He pushes his little chair out and he starts kicking the ground as well. The kids around him, same reaction. Taylor, what are you doing? Stop. I can't hear my computer. The teacher leaves my student, comes over to him. The teacher's assistant stays with my student. And this child with the behavior disorder is looking around to see who's reacting to him, how much attention he's getting. He gets both feet involved to make it louder. Now, I haven't left my spot in the back of the room where I'm just sitting there and like a tennis spectator, I'm just looking back and forth between these two little boys. On the surface, their behavior is identical. Two little boys making a lot of noise, causing a lot of commotion. But below the surface, the motivation for the behavior is completely different. For the child with the behavior disorder, the motivation is attention. He wants every eye in that classroom to be on him. For the child with autism, the motivation is dysregulation, which we will talk about a little bit later on in the training. He needed input into his body to help keep himself in his seat. I would sort of connect it to, in order to relate to this idea, if you're the type of person who, when you get nervous, you kind of bounce your knee a little bit. I'm that person. In a meeting, if the meeting's running over, I've got 100 things to do. I'm looking at the clock. We're only on the 5th agenda item out of 7. I start to bounce my knee just up and down, kind of shake a little bit. Same type of idea. We're getting input into our body to keep ourselves in our chair, to keep ourselves regulated. So this was a more extreme version of that. Now, the reason I say this is my favorite side is because it challenges us to reimagine and rethink how we support children who have these neurodevelopmental diagnoses, or children who are neurodivergent, I should say. And so if we see them through this behavioral lens, oftentimes we approach it in one of two ways, sort of a rewards and consequences model. I'm going to reward you if you don't do the behavior. I'm going to give you a consequence for doing it. I'll give you a chocolate chip cookie if you wait in line patiently. We'll leave and sit in the car if you don't. That type of idea. For this child with autism that I was observing, he had a smiley face earning system. Every 10 minutes of safe behavior, he would earn a smiley face. After 6 smiley faces, he would earn this little toy that he liked to play with. Is that going to do anything for his dysregulation? No. If anything, it's going to make it worse because now, as he's trying to keep his body in his seat, he's worried about losing his toy. So we shift and we see the child through that lens of neurodevelopment and understanding that it's their unique neurology. The way that their neurology, the way that their brain processes the world around them and the world within them, their sensory environment, the language that they're hearing, the way that they communicate their needs, the way that they regulate themselves, that experience can be unique. And that experience and the way it's processed leads to the behavior that we see on the surface. With that understanding, it changes how we support. So we use proactive strategies. How can I relieve this child's dysregulation so it doesn't get to the point where they're kicking the ground? We implemented, and I'm sure you can guess, two things. Whole class movement breaks. I'm sure my little friend with the behavior disorder probably needed to move too. And then for this child, we implemented a break system where anytime he felt like his body needed a movement break, he could ask for one. And then he was given a little menu of choices. And he chose most of the time, and I don't know why, because this is not regulating to me, he chose squats. And he would hold on to the edge of his desk and do some deep knee bends, but it makes sense. He's getting input into his muscles and his joints to help keep him regulated. I hope I've made a case for why this is my favorite side, because it challenges all of us to rethink how we perceive children that have some challenges with self-regulation, with communication, et cetera, and support those challenges in a proactive way. So, shall we dive into the diagnosis a little bit further? Let's go. Just really, really quickly, we don't need to spend too much time here because we're going to dive into all of this stuff. The diagnosis of autism in 2013, there was a big shift. So prior to 2013, there were several different diagnoses. You may have heard of Asperger's syndrome, childhood disintegrative disorder, autistic disorder. In 2013, all of those diagnoses were changed to ASD, autism spectrum disorder, or autism. So now we have autism level 1, autism level 2, autism level 3. Those levels are based on the support that the person requires. However, they create a bit of a misconception because people will say, got it. So someone with ASD level 1 has a little bit of autism. Someone with level 2 has medium autism, and someone with level 3 has a lot of autism. Almost as though there's this dial that you turn, and as you turn it, you increase the severity of the autism. It doesn't work like that. Rather, those two areas that you see there of challenge or difference, social communication and behavior, manifest differently depending upon where the individual falls. And I'll give you an example of that. I had a student that would communicate in spoken language in 2 to 3 word phrases. Water, please, pencil, please, help, please. I'm sure everybody watching this recording knows that asking for help is a huge life skill. So the fact that he could ask for help independently whenever he needed it was wonderful. He also supplemented his spoken language with a device. So he had an iPad, He had an app, it's such a tongue twister, pro lo quo to go. And he would either press symbols, type words or sentences, and the iPad, would generate speech for him. Sometimes he would grab his iPad, he would walk over to me with it, hand it to me, and say, "Help, please." And as my eyes were scanning down to look at the iPad screen, I would pray the screen was off. Because if the screen was off, it was clear what help he needed. It wasn't charging, it wasn't turning on, something obvious was wrong. But sometimes he would hand it to me, and I would look at it, and it would look fine. And I'd say, "Joe, help with what?" "Help, please." I know. I need help with, help, please. So he could initiate asking for help, but didn't have the spoken language to elaborate on what that help was. He was probably thinking exactly what he needed, but generating that into spoken language was a challenge. I ended up actually stumbling upon it later on, literally almost, because he was sitting in a beanbag and I was walking past him, and he was very, very tall, much taller than me. So I couldn't see what he was doing if he was standing up, but he's down below me. And I hear this sound going, shoo, shoo, and I turn around and he's deleting pages of vocabulary out of his app because he liked the whoosh sound that it made, and he couldn't figure out how to restore them. But he wasn't able to tell me that using spoken language when he came over to ask for help. How frustrating that must have been for him to have me not understanding what his needs were. And again, his diagnosis was autism level 3. Now let's shift to someone who's diagnosed with ASD level 1. This is a gentleman that I have worked with both alongside as a colleague and with, but at the time, the story comes from when he was in high school. And let me start by saying, his spoken language at 2 years old exceeded mine now, and I'm 38. At 2, he went and he picked a flower out of the front lawn, walked over to his mom and said, "Mom, this flower is exquisite." At best, I'm saying nice flower. So truly, his spoken language is extraordinary. Now, he was in all general education classes, straight A's and everything. And then in one class, his grades began to plummet. 0, 0, 0. The teacher offered bonus points. Didn't work. The teacher offered detention. Still wasn't doing his work. Everything was turned in blank. And the teacher interpreted it in a very behavioral way. You've decided you're giving up on your education. You've decided you don't care anymore. Finally, when nothing was working, they had a meeting with mom. Mom comes in, sits next to her son. The teacher explains everything, and mom turns to her son and said, "Why aren't you doing your work?" He said, "There's a new girl in class. Her seat's right next to mine, and she wears so much perfume that I just shut down. I can't think. I can't do my work because I'm so overwhelmed by the smell." Now, I mentioned to you that his spoken language was and is extraordinary. Was he able to use that spoken language to ask for help, to ask to have his seat moved, to explain when the teacher's offering him rewards and consequences why he's having trouble? No. So it's not that he has just a little bit of autism, and my student who could say, "Help, please," but didn't have the spoken language to elaborate, had a lot of autism, but rather that their communication and regulation challenges impacted these two people in different but equally significant ways. And the reason that I linger here, the reason I spend the time, is because a lot of times our folks more towards that level 1 side of the spectrum are perceived with that just a little bit of autism or that label of high functioning and don't really get the support that they need because of that misconception. So that understanding is so essential. And in fact, many autistic people are now saying, I'm not really a point on a line. I don't fall here on the spectrum or over here, but rather each of us is this kaleidoscope of skills and challenges that's ever evolving and ever changing throughout the lifespan. Now, we're here today to talk about some of the challenges that some of the children might have when they're visiting you in the North Pole. We need to talk about them because without understanding those challenges, how can you provide support? However, it's equally essential that we acknowledge the incredible strengths that come with autism, the incredible creativity, and just the extraordinary things about each individual. I don't see autism through a deficit-based lens. I understand that each person, as you see on this screen, is this kaleidoscope of skills and challenges, as we all are. So please keep that in mind as we're going through this training, because as we move into the next section, we talk a lot about challenges. Again, because it helps us to prepare. But that is just a very, very small piece of all that makes up an autistic person. So please keep that in mind as well. And now moving into the iceberg theory of autism. I'm sure you've heard of the iceberg theory of fill in the blank. However, when it's specifically for autism, it comes out of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill's Teach Autism program. The idea being that so often autistic people are defined by behavior. Again, guilty. I used to have a classroom where I would have very, very little notice before getting a new student. And so my boss would walk into my classroom with that manila envelope. I can still see him opening that door, and he would hand it to me, and I would take all the evaluations out and I would skip to the behavior section. Now, we all know why I was doing it. I wanted to make sure that when that person arrived in my classroom the next day, I could keep everybody safe. What do I need to know? However, unintentionally, I was defining that person by behavior before they even walked through the door. Imagine that any of us, any of you watching me, if before anybody ever met me, they received a list of the things that were hard for me. They received a list of the things that might be more challenging before I'd even walked in the door. And so again, unintentionally, I was doing that to my students. So we want to shift towards an understanding of why. What might be going on below the surface? We say at the Autism Project that we certainly did not come up with this phrase, all behavior is communication. What is this person communicating through behavior? Is it a communication challenge? Is it a self-regulation or sensory challenge? Social misunderstandings. Maybe that child wants to play and doesn't know exactly how to go about it. Or they might be so excited to play that they get dysregulated by that. And again, we'll talk about this as we go through. Is it cognitive challenges? Is it something medical that might be going on? Now, we are so briefly going to touch on medical conditions because for your purposes, being that you're in the North Pole and that you're not really working in a diagnostic capacity or long-term with people, this would only be applicable to you most of the time if you have a family member, a friend, a personal connection. So I'm going to go through this very, very quickly, just pull out a couple statistics. Autism rarely exists on an island as the only diagnosis that a person has. Oftentimes, there are coexisting medical conditions. You can see here, epilepsy impacts up to 30% of autistic individuals. Sleep disorders, up to 80% of autistic people. GI conditions, up to 85%. So this might be you've got a child sitting on your lap and they are burping, or they might be pushing against their stomach, things of that nature. Could be related to a GI condition, could be something else, but could be an upset stomach, acid reflux, et cetera, et cetera. Allergies. Autistic people 1.6 times more likely to have eczema or related skin allergy, 1.8 times more likely to have a food allergy. Autistic people are more prone to severe headaches, to ear infections, to immune disorders. So why are we talking about this in a discussion around behavior? Because if you're working with a child that's feeling pain, illness, or just discomfort, it can impact their behavior. So the family will help guide you through all of this as you're working with the child, but again, just something to be aware of. And now we are moving into sensory and self-regulation. I'm smiling because I'm looking at the time. I know we have limited time together, and I could talk about this all day long. I won't, but I could. So I'm going to start by showing you a quick video. This is Alex, and Alex is an autistic boy. And he's the producer, director, and star of this video. This video is a sensory simulation of what it feels like to Alex when he walks through a mall. I'm going to shut my video and audio off so that you can see this and just focus on this. If you yourself have sensory challenges, please take care of yourself first. Fast forward this recording so you don't see it or turn your volume down. If you can tolerate it, however, please turn your volume up as loud as it will go to really immerse yourself in this experience. You can also see this on YouTube if you'd like a larger version. It's called Can You Make It to the End from the National Autistic Society. So let's go ahead. I'm going to press play, turn my video and audio off, and then we'll pop back in.
Six, 7, 8, 9. Take my hand. No, Alex. It's fine, isn't it? It's fine. I'm not naughty. I'm autistic. And I just get too much information.
As I said, please check out the National Autistic Society. They're pretty extraordinary. They have a lot of great resources on their website. Now, I always have to take a deep breath after that because it's extraordinarily overwhelming. And I remember when I was choosing videos for this presentation and for others, I'm very careful to make sure that those videos contain the authentic voice. And I remember for that video, and there's another one also produced by Alex that we don't have the license for, so we showed this one particularly, but on YouTube you can see it. It's a 360 video, meaning if you watch it on your phone, you can turn your phone up and it will look up, down, turn it around. So it's as though you're seeing the world through Alex's eyes the entire time. And there was a functionality, I don't know if it's still there, but when I first found it, there was functionality there that allowed you, there was a stencil that you could print out from YouTube, and there was cardboard. And what you could do is you could trace the stencil on cardboard, cut it out, wrap it around your phone, and turn your phone into a bit of a rudimentary virtual reality goggle set. And I remember thinking, oh, I don't want to do that. That sounds so overwhelming. And then I thought, oh, I get to opt out. I get to say, no thanks, that experience of the world is not for me. And that's it. I don't have to do it. But for many of our folks, they're not able to just shut it off. Those that experience sensory challenges, which is the majority of autistic people. And sensory challenges exist beyond the boundaries of autism. Oftentimes, people with ADHD, people with sensory processing disorder, people with trauma histories, people born prematurely. There are so many people with sensory challenges. So really looking at what these challenges are and understanding them can be incredibly powerful, especially when we think about a fairly new environment like coming to visit all of you in the North Pole. So let's quickly do a little bit of a summary of what our sensory systems are. So we have our sense of vision. What do you see? I encourage you, wherever you are in whatever space, let's do a little bit of a sensory audit together. Think about in this moment right now, what sources of light are in your space? So for me, I'm looking at the camera, which is on top of the computer screen. There's a glow from this screen. I have a second screen over here. There's a glow from that one. There's lighting up there. There's lighting back there. Those are artificial lights, all of them. There's a ring light right in front of me, trying to light up my face a little bit. Again, artificial. There's a little bit of natural light coming in through the windows there, though it is getting to be about 4 o'clock, so the sun's going down. As I said, it's December 2024. So there's also a reflection of light. There's not just the source, but now it's bouncing off of other things. I'm on a counter here. It's bouncing off the counter. It's bouncing off my water bottle and my coffee mug and all of these different surfaces around me. So noticing sources of light, color, what colors are jumping out at you? Yes, the screen has lots of colors. Where else in your space? Where do you see patterns? Where are your eyes drawn? So I'm looking at the camera. If I wasn't, where do my eyes go? So I'm doing this in my home, you probably can tell. And so back there, behind you is the kitchen, and there is a bumblebee covered yellow dish towel hanging on the door to the oven. So if I'm not looking at the camera, my eyes fall to that, it draws my attention. Notice how many objects are in your view. I'm looking in the kitchen, so there's a lot. There's a lot of stuff. Should be more organized. Notice depth. Visually, what you see that's closer to you, what appears to be further away. Visually, so our sense of vision is processed through our eyes. Everything that you see in that space, are you attending to all of it at the same time? Probably not. Some of you may be, but probably there are things that you're visually focused on and things that are in the background. So I am visually focused on the camera, then I go down to the slide, then I look at the time to make sure I'm not talking too much, probably am, and back up to the camera again. So it's almost this little triangle, but I'm seeing so many other things. I'm just not attending to them. They're not distracting to me. And if I go through any of these senses and they don't apply to you, just skip them. I'll tell you what my sensory experience is, but you yourself can just skip right through it. Auditory, what do you hear? Yes, you hear me, but I guarantee there's a lot more going on in your space. I hear the sound of the refrigerator whirring and humming right over there. I can hear the HVAC system turning on. I hear the fan inside my laptop here. I hear the buzzing from the light, from the LED ring light back there. I can hear cars pulling into the parking lot outside. I hear a door closing somewhere in the hallway over there. This is an apartment complex. I can hear somebody speaking in the hallway now. So there's a lot of noise in my environment, but I'm not attending to all of it. I don't stop the presentation in the middle and go out and listen to what's happening in the hallway, or just stop talking, not even get up and go, just stop talking because I'm so distracted by what's happening there. I'm able to sort out that background and attend to what I need to attend to. Now let's continue. Let's add to that. What do you feel on your skin? Tactile is touch. So that's all the feeling you get from all of your skin and the inside of your mouth. So as I'm talking to all of you, I feel my tongue hitting my teeth, hitting my cheeks. I feel my lips touching together. I feel my sweater. I feel little hairs on the back of my neck that don't fit into my bun here. I feel my earrings. I feel my necklace. I feel my pants. I feel my socks. All of that touch sensation I am getting all the time. But for me, it's in the background. I'm not noticing the feeling of the little hairs touching the back of my neck. I'm not noticing the feeling of the sweater or the pants or any of those sorts of things. Your gustatory system, what do you taste? I taste, oddly enough, a little bit of string beans. I had a bowl of string beans before I started this presentation. So a subtle bit of string beans and a little bit of espresso as well. What do you smell? String beans. I smell a little bit of bleach. I recently cleaned the bathroom, so it's got that sort of bleachy, chloriney smell. That's pretty much it. One of the things that I will recommend to all of you when you're supporting neurodivergent children, which all of you are, is please don't wear or use fragrance, especially artificial fragrance. So that means perfumes, colognes, scented oil diffusers, or any scent diffusers, air fresheners, even scented candles. I'm guessing most of you don't in the professional context, but any of that can be really overwhelming for some of our folks. You will remember the gentleman I spoke about at the beginning who couldn't do his work because the girl next to him was wearing a lot of perfume. That's also scented hand sanitizers. Really, any of that can be really overwhelming for our folks. Just avoiding that is really helpful. Your vestibular sense is your sense of balance, helps you to detect your own motion in the environment, where your head is in relation to the ground. So I'm on a stool right now, so I can kind of move back and forth like this. I'm able to stay looking at the camera as I'm doing that. I'm able to orient my eyes towards looking at you. I don't feel as though I'm going to fall, though there's a possibility it's going to happen, but I don't feel like it. I can detect that I am moving side to side. I can detect that I'm moving back and forth, up and down, rotating. So it helps to detect our own motion, our movement through space. As I said, it tells us where our head is in relation to the ground. So if we're walking and we, heaven forbid, trip, our vestibular sense detects that our head is going towards the ground and we put our hands out. Our proprioceptive sense is our muscles, our joints, our tendons, and ligaments. It helps to tell us where our body is in space. So for example, I have two hands, put them out in front of me. So I'm looking at two. Okay, I can see them, they're accounted for. Now I'm moving one back here. I'm not touching anything. Even my fingers are not touching together. There's no touch sensation other than maybe the slightest air movement. But I still know where my hand is. I can feel it back here, even though I'm not looking at it. That's your proprioceptive sense. So the idea of falling asleep on your arm, I think I first heard this from a woman named Virginia Spielman, who is the CEO of the Star Institute for Sensory Processing in Colorado, I believe. She talked about falling asleep on your arm. And when you fall asleep on your arm and you wake up and you're looking at your arm and you have no sensation. So you see it, it's there, but you don't feel it. For me, my first instinct is always, my arm's gone before I recalibrate and realize that I've just fallen asleep on it. Then your next step is you start to squeeze to try and get some input into your arm. So you're trying to restore that feeling. You may be working with children who are under responsive in their sensory system, in their proprioceptive system, excuse me. And so because they're under responsive, they're not getting as much of that feeling. So you might find that you're working with children who are seeking pressure, seeking input. Some children might even take your hand and put it on their arm or something like that. So the family can come in and provide that pressure, provide those squeezes. So I'm just letting you know why it's happening. Or you may be working with a child who's wearing a weighted vest or a compression vest that's helping them to get that input. So that oftentimes is why the person is wearing some of those supports. The interoceptive system. Interoceptive sense is all the sensation we get from inside our bodies. So feel right now, and I hope you don't have hunger or thirst. There's also the need to use the restroom, pain, illness, ambient temperature. So there's touch temperature. I'm touching ice, the ice is cold, or I feel cold. Fatigue is experienced through our interoceptive sense. In addition, our emotions are very closely tied to interoception. So, for example, if you're feeling anxious, you might feel your heart beating. You might feel your lungs expanding. You might feel butterflies in your stomach. Your face might feel hot. You might add some other sensory systems into this. Your hands might be tingly. And the list goes on. I don't want to trigger anyone. You can guess what anything else. But physically, you feel those feelings first, and then you recognize them as, ooh, I'm anxious. And then with that, ooh, I don't like that feeling. I want that to go away. What can I do? So for me, if I'm anxious before a training, I get those feelings I just described, and then I use cognitive strategies and sensory strategies to cope with those feelings. So cognitive strategies, thinking strategies. Oh, you've done this training before. Why don't you review the slides? Make sure you're comfortable with everything. Sensory strategies. Why don't you go for a little walk, have some chamomile tea, listen to some relaxing music. And so you're using those thought strategies and those sensory strategies to help with anxiety. And then you know the anxiety is going away because you feel those physical feelings going away. So we rely on our sensory system to help us to identify and to express and to regulate our emotions. So as we've been sitting here together for some time now, all of your sensory systems, whether you have all 8 or a selection of these, have been in real time pulling in all this information from your environment. And it's pulling it in through your receptors, your eyes, ears, nose, mouth, skin, et cetera, pulling them in through your receptors, through your peripheral nervous system, your nerves, into your spine and brain, your central nervous system. And then there it gets integrated. So different sensory systems may be put together. So for example, I'm looking at my water bottle, I am touching my water bottle, I'm lifting my water bottle. So I'm using visual touch and proprioception. I'm also using vestibular, not to tip out of my chair as well through this whole process. So our systems are working together, they're integrated. Our neurology decides what we need in the foreground, what we need to pay attention to, brings it to the foreground. What we don't need is moved to the background. And that creates for us a picture of our experience. So subconsciously, we can decide, am I okay? Am I safe? Can I keep doing what I need to do? Now, if you can't rely on your sensory system to give you an accurate picture of the world, it can have significant contributions to things like anxiety, to fight or flight. Because if you can't rely on your sensory systems to tell you what's happening outside of you and inside of you, how can you determine whether or not you're safe? So for those folks that may be hypersensitive, over responsive to input, or hyposensitive, under responsive to input, or oftentimes a combination of those two things, or perhaps everything's in the foreground and nothing is sorted out, or too many things are in the foreground, or everything is sorted out, everything's in the background, you can't attend to what you need to attend to. It can be incredibly dysregulating. So when we're thinking specifically about hypersensitivity, over responsivity, in autism specifically, the 2 most common hypersensitivities, though certainly not the only hypersensitivities, the 2 most common are sound and touch. So oftentimes we're playing Christmas music at the North Pole, kids are lined up for a prolonged period of time. It might be really challenging to listen to, now everybody's different, but for some to listen to this very loud music for quite a long period of time. If the family has headphones, noise canceling headphones, that could explain why the child is wearing those headphones. They might be using Bluetooth headphones and listening to their own music as well, again, depending on the child. Or you might be able to offer some headphones. Have a little sensory basket of different tools there, then the child can put those headphones on. The child might also be sensitive to touch. So you might find that if the child is touched, like someone tries to get their attention, that the child jumps. So what we typically recommend is not to initiate that contact, to allow the child to initiate. That can help to kind of determine if the child is comfortable having your arm around them or something like that, or if that's going to make them uncomfortable. Some other sensory tools that you might notice, some children might be wearing sunglasses or tinted glasses, like yellow tinted glasses. Those children might be sensitive to light. And again, I'm saying children for the purposes of children visiting Santa, but autism is lifelong. So you might be seeing some adults as well with some of these sensory supports. You might find that a child uses a chew tube, or, and this, I always stumble over this word, forgive me, jewelry, which is chewable jewelry. I got to work on my enunciation with that one. But what that is it's essentially silicone. It might be shaped like a T, or it might be just a rubber tube, or they can look a variety of different shapes that the child might be chewing on to get some of that hard input into their jaw, some stimulation inside their mouth. Again, it varies person to person, but just letting you know what it is so that you can recognize it. So some of our kids may be oversensitive to their visual sense and might benefit from having some lights turned down. Others, auditory sound, and might again benefit from having some music turned down or from wearing headphones. Touch, tactile. As we talked about, not just having the child initiate rather than you if the child is uncomfortable. Taste will simply mean some children are very resistant to any candies or snacks that are offered. Others, maybe less so, maybe very motivated by getting those cookies or candy canes or whatever it is that you might be offering. Smell, again, I just recommend that you eliminate any use of artificial fragrances. And then with vestibular, again, for your purposes, you're not really going to be too involved in the vestibular piece. Proprioception, you might notice a child wearing a weighted vest or a compression vest or something of the like. And interoception, all those feelings from inside their bodies. So again, in your context, you won't really be involved in any of the supports for that, but just something to help you be informed on all of these things. Now, as I told you, Santa, I could keep going, but we simply don't have the time. So I am going to move on here to autism and anxiety. So I just want to draw your attention to these two percentages here. And it's important to note these percentages are from 2018, pre-COVID. So both numbers are probably higher now. But it's good to just look at the difference. So in society at large in 2018, about 18% of people had a diagnosed anxiety disorder. In the autism community, that number was up to 84%. 18 versus 84. So we can't really think about how we support autistic people without thinking about how to reduce anxiety. When anxiety increases, we're likely to see increases in other areas, increased social withdrawal potentially. So a child that you're used to having come every Christmas to see you might suddenly be more anxious or might be pulling back. Increased reliance on routines and rituals. And this is really my sort of entry point to the fact, this is quite important. Routine and predictability is extraordinarily important for many autistic people. The more predictable you can make the child's visit to the North Pole, the easier it's going to be for that child. We'll talk about some supports for that in just a bit. Increased sensory sensitivity. Sometimes when any of our anxiety increases, suddenly we're more sensitive to input. So for any of you that have ever been lost driving, suddenly you shut the radio off because suddenly when you're anxious, when you're overwhelmed, that sound can be really irritating. And increased engagement in special interest. Most of the time, this is a really wonderful thing. A special interest is an area that the child is very immersed in, one area or multiple areas. Examples, I had a student who loved the movie Frozen, dinosaurs, trains, the Mass Bay Transit Authority specifically, a specific type of doll, different Power Rangers shows. I mean, the list goes on. Neuropsychiatry, one of my students. So it could really be anything. If the parent who's there or the caregiver who's there with the child tells you what they're interested in, it can be a great way of opening up conversation. Another thing that's really helpful, if the child wants to talk to you about their special interest at length, Don't try to change the subject. Don't try to turn it back to Christmas. Just talk to them about their special interests, because that is such truly, it's a magical time for that child to be able to make a connection with another person over their special interest. Can be really, really powerful for them. So just a recommendation there. And if they are asking for gifts around their special interest, or if they're asking for gifts that might not be age appropriate, or you might not think, well, that's not a great gift. Don't you want fill in the blank? Every child is unique, every child is different, and we'll have different preferences. I was just having this conversation yesterday with our executive director, who shared that her son, who was autistic, asked for a case of Dasani water for Christmas. And it made him happier than any of the toys that they wrapped or the video games or anything else. He wanted Dasani water and he wanted Pop-Tarts. So just keep an open mind about all of these things. And again, if the child wants to talk to you about their special interest, then you are in the inner circle, and that's a really lovely place to be. We'll talk briefly about communication challenges and social misunderstandings. So in the diagnosis of autism, back to that spectrum slide at the beginning, we saw two core areas of challenge or difference: social communication and behavior. Under social communication, there are three subcategories: differences or difficulties with reciprocal interaction. So that might be a child who just talks and talks and talks and talks and talks and doesn't give you time to respond. Again, totally fine, just roll with it. It might be a child who's non-speaking, who might communicate to you with symbol exchange or with a device, or may just want to enjoy time sitting in your lap, and you might talk to them about different things that you've noticed about Christmas or anything you'd like to talk about. Challenges maintaining relationships. Again, Santa, Mrs. Claus, elves, you don't need to worry about this one. One thing that I will say, so with children, a lot of times this looks like difficulty or differences in the way that the child engages in play. But so much of when we talk about relationships, it takes two people in a relationship, whether it's a child's relationship, whether it's an adult relationship. So really a huge priority for me and for us at the Autism Project is working to understand all different types of neurotypes. Because a lot of times these breakdowns in relationships and friendships begin because neither person really understands the other one's neurotype. So that's just a little aside for our purposes, for your purposes at the North Pole. Again, you don't really need to worry about this one, but just something to be aware of, again, if you have personal connections. Nonverbal communication challenges. So nonverbal communication is body language, vocal tone, vocal volume. What I would just say is not to, demand is not the right word, but not to request eye contact from the children that are visiting you. Oftentimes, in order for a child really to enjoy and attend to their experience at the North Pole, then avoiding eye contact is helpful. For some people, eye contact can be very stressful, very dysregulating. Some people even describe it as painful. So just allowing the child to look down or away as you talk to the child can, again, send such a powerful message of understanding and inclusivity for that child. There's so much more I could say on each slide, but we just don't have the time. Cognitive challenges. This is very important. When I'm talking about cognitive challenges, I am not referring to intelligence. Just like the neurotypical community in the autism community, there are people with below average, average, and above average intelligence. When I am referring to cognitive challenges, I am talking about things like executive functioning, planning, organizing, shifting from plan A to plan B, working memory. Working memory is our ability to hold on to step-by-step pieces of information. Mental simulation, and I won't go through each of these, I just want to pull out a few for you. Mental simulation is our ability to sort of think about and go through the steps of what might happen in the future. So a child knows, okay, we are going to take pictures with Santa. So now I'm going to picture what that's like. I'm going to picture sitting in the car on the way to Santa. I'm going to picture getting out and waiting in line for Santa. I'm going to picture what it's going to be like when I get up to the front of the line. And then what am I going to ask Santa for? I got to think about that. I'm going to sit on Santa's lap and I'm going to take a picture. Then I'm going to get a candy cane when I'm done, or whatever the steps might be. So they're simulating the process in preparation for going. Now, in autism, ADHD, various diagnoses, or even no diagnosis and just challenges in this area, some of these things can have a major impact. So if the child is not able to go through, for example, this mental simulation, then they can't prepare themselves for going to see Santa. And then going to see Santa becomes very unpredictable. And many of us can relate to a need for predictability in order to feel safe, in order to reduce our anxiety. So if children have difficulty with executive functioning, we oftentimes will see higher anxiety because that child has difficulty transitioning and difficulty predicting what's going to happen, preparing for what's going to happen, adjusting to change. Perhaps the child expected that just like every other year, the elf was going to wear a green outfit, and today the elf was in a blue outfit, and the child is suddenly very upset. Because again, that need for predictability and routine is very, very strong. So we're going to circle back to this again when we talk about visual supports, but I just wanted to make a quick mention of it here. Now, on that spectrum slide, two core areas of challenge or difference: social communication and interaction with those three subcategories that we just saw, and then behavior with these four subcategories. Now, it's important to note, I'm pulling this language from the American Psychiatric Association, but we're humanizing it. We're softening it. This is very deficit-based language, but we're reframing as we go through each one. Extreme attachment to routines and patterns, again, that's the need for predictability and routine. Repetitive speech is called echolalia. So you might be working with a child who you say, "What do you want for Christmas?" And they say back to you, "What do you want for Christmas?" That's immediate echolalia. The child might know exactly what they want, but not have the spoken language to be able to share that with you. Or they might be repeating lines from movies and TV shows. Could be Christmas movies that they're thinking of. They might engage with you using different lines from movies and TV shows involving Santa Claus or involving Mrs. Claus or involving elves, and using those lines to engage with you. And you might recognize them. And if you do, it might be helpful to share that you recognize that, to again show that child that you're interested in what they're interested in. Repetitive movements is often called stimming. So that might be jumping up and down, rocking back and forth, hand flapping, things of that nature. And again, you don't need to do anything about it. You don't even need to mention it. If needed, if the child looks happy, you can say, "Oh, you're happy. I'm happy to see you." But you don't have to bring it up at all. It's just the child's way of regulating their emotions. Oftentimes shown, yes, in frustration, in harder times, but also when kids are very, very excited. Intense and restrictive interest. Again, this is very clinical terminology, but it's an area of high interest, as we talked about earlier. Most of the time, that's really wonderful. And you might be one of their special interests. So that's, that's very exciting. The last one there we talked about at length: difficulty integrating sensory information, seeking or avoiding sensory input. Now, we've reached the conclusion of the sort of describing the diagnosis. Let's talk in a little bit more depth on some of the visuals that you can use in your context. So a visual support can be anything. It can be a card like this one if you're offering a candy cane. If you're offering multiple choices, you can have different choices listed out. We have excuse me, completely lost my train. We have a software called Board Maker that we use to create these different visuals. And as part of the training, we did provide these visuals to our Claus community. You can reach out to us at the Autism Project if you're looking for them again. But a visual support is really anything that's represented visually. And visual supports can be extraordinarily helpful because what they allow us to do is to have information that we can re-reference. So I am not a great flyer. I get very stressed out when I travel. Particularly, I just imagine, so that mental simulation I talked about, I imagine what would happen if I lost my boarding pass and also my phone died. And also I couldn't find a board to tell me what gate I was in. And also I lost well, I just go through the process of, worst case scenario. And so in order to soothe my anxiety, I take out my boarding pass frequently. Oh, okay, what gate? I'm at the right gate. Okay, let's do it again. Oh, what time? Okay, I still have time. So I regularly reference that visual because I'm anxious. I either don't trust what I remember or it's harder for me to remember information. So if a child is entering a new or fairly irregular situation, like visiting the North Pole, having visuals can be very helpful in navigating that situation. And there are a lot of reasons why the child may have difficulty holding on to something they're told verbally. Oh, we're going to go see Santa and you're going to wait in line and then we're going to get up there and you're going to talk to the elf and then you're going to sit in Santa's lap and then. Once that person stops talking, that information is gone. So if the child can't hold on to it, again, that working memory, then that anxiety returns. So having something written can be really helpful. One thing I want to keep in mind, that box you see at the top there, verbal expression does not necessarily equal verbal comprehension. You may have a child who talks a blue streak, who talks and talks and talks and talks and talks. And Santa, I want this, and what's it like at the North Pole, and what does Rudolph eat for dinner, and blah, 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 blah. But then when you reply or when you ask a question, it may take some time for the child to process. So for example, if you say, what do you want for Christmas? That child may be assigning meaning to what you asked, one word at a time. What? Okay, they're talking to me. What do? It's a question. What do you? A question about me. What do you want? A question about something I want. What do you want for? Something I want for something else. What do you want for Christmas? Oh, what do I want for Christmas? For some of our kids, might take like 5 seconds, some 15, some 30. After you've asked the question, and this is hard for me, be comfortable with the silence. Don't ask the question again, because in asking the question again, the child may start over with that processing. So if the child looks at you or the child looks over your head or looks away, give them that space, sit in that quiet for that child to process. I'll never forget one of my colleagues said, I hate when people finish my sentences when I've paused because it makes me feel like what I had to say isn't worth their time. So really giving people that opportunity. If the child is talking and stops mid-sentence to process, let them finish. Don't predict what they're going to say and end their sentence for them. So they may be expressing themselves verbally very fluently, but have difficulty with that comprehension, might take some more time. You also might be working with a child who is entirely non-speaking, but who understands everything being said around them. So even if the child does not have any spoken language, talk to the child, because you don't necessarily have to ask questions, but talk to the child as though they understand. You can get information from the family about what that child might want for Christmas, and then say, oh, that's great, Mary. Your mom just said that you wanted X, Y, and Z. Because so often for our non-speaking children, people unintentionally, very well-meaning people, will speak about them as though they're not sitting right there. So engaging them in the conversation is extraordinarily powerful. For your context, a first then board is a great tool. It says just 2 bits of information. This is what I'm doing now, and this is what's happening directly after that. Remember, I mentioned predictability and routine is extraordinarily important for many, many, many autistic people, for children in general. For some people, I love a good dose of predictability and routine myself. Now, by using this first we're going to wait in line, then we're going to see Santa, gives context. Just need these 2 bits of information. We can't see Santa right away because first we need to wait in line. But when we're done waiting in line, then we get to see Santa. Now, oftentimes when working with children who have difficulty waiting, a lot of people will set timers. But as you know, the time needed to wait in line can be very unpredictable. So we recommend using something called a countdown timer. And a countdown timer allows you to actually have a little bit of flexibility with the time. So again, this was included in your visuals packet that was handed out to you. If you don't have one, let us know. We're happy to send them out. But with this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, this countdown, the caretaker can stretch the time a little bit. So this is a custom one for all of you, but this is another one that we've used just to show you how to use it. So we might say 5 more. We won't say minutes, we'll just say 5 more, and waiting is all done. And then a few minutes later, we say 4 more, and waiting is all done. And then a few minutes later, 3 more, and waiting is all done. So as the line starts to go down and down and down, the caretaker is the one who's able to use these visuals to help count down. So the child can see the passage of time. Saying 5 more minutes, as I'm sure you know, for all children, saying, oh, 5 more minutes, oh, we have to wait. Just regulating. What does 5 more minutes mean? I don't know. So having a countdown timer can be a very powerful tool. And again, take these, pass them out to your families. Laminating them can be helpful. Pre-folding them a little so they get a little crease in them can be helpful if you have the time for that. But passing them out so that the family can count down can be very helpful. And if you have an elf available, or if Mrs. Claus is free or Santa's free, they can show the family how to use this to help their child to wait in line. A choice board is another great option. So let's say, I don't know if you have quite this robust an amount of choices at the end of seeing Santa, depending on where you're working, at the North Pole, of course. But whatever choices you have available after the child has sat with Santa can be offered on a choice board. Coffee is probably for the moms and the dads, or the caretakers, grandma, grandpa, foster mom, foster dad, aunt, uncle. So the child can be offered this board, and the apple cider, the candy cane, the coffee, they're all Velcroed to the board. So the child has I want and some Velcro there, and let's say the child wants a candy cane. They grab the candy cane symbol off the board and put it next to I want. So then it says I want candy cane. So it allows the child to make a choice. So often caretakers, workers, professionals think, oh, I know what the child wants. I'll ask for them. But you never know. So giving the child, empowering the child to make their own choice can be very helpful. Again, whoever's working this part, if there's an elf, Mrs. Claus, et cetera, you may, if you have the time, if you have the flexibility, you may want to ask the family what choices are safe to offer. For some children, it might be that hot things are not an option, or it might be that things with certain ingredients are not an option, and then you can just take them off the choice board before offering it to the child. This is a social narrative. Getting my picture taken with Santa. Today, I'm going to get my picture taken with Santa at the mall. I might have to wait in line with other people before I get my picture taken. When I am with Santa, I can sit on his lap, I can stand next to him, I can sit next to him, I can tell him what I want for Christmas, I can say thank you when I'm finished, I can get a candy cane when I'm finished. My family may take my candy and hold it for me. Getting my picture taken with Santa is fun. So with any of these things that you see here, you can take this story, you can customize it to fit your needs, make adjustments, but having these available to families, if you've got a website, having it on your website can be really helpful. So families can read this with their child to help give them a little bit of context before they head to the North Pole to see you. Now, of course, the fact that we are separated by time, you're not watching this live, means that it will be difficult for you to ask questions right now. Impossible without some Christmas magic. However, please feel free to reach out to the Autism Project via email with any questions that you have. My contact information, or my department's contact information, and my colleagues is available on our website, theautismproject.org. Thank you so much for taking the time to spend your evening or wherever you are with me to learn more about autism. Again, I'm a lifelong learner. I look forward to learning from you as well. Have a very happy holidays and a very Merry Christmas. Thank you.